Hello, everyone. This is Brownback from Language Information and Computation. And we have here a guest, Dr. Natalia Zawadzka from the Department of Computer Science of the Academy of Sciences in Warsaw. Her work is corpus-based computational. She does discourse analysis and sociolinguistics, would it be right? And she's also visiting here because we have a joint project together on euphemisms processing. It's funded by both NSF and Polish, what is the name? Polish National Science Foundation, something like that, right? And
Yes.
We are very happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, so much for the introduction and for inviting me to speak here today on an important topic. But before I begin, I would like to briefly introduce the Institute of Computer Science of the Polish Academy of Sciences, where I am based, and more specifically our linguistic engineering team, whose research activity, as you said, centers around computational linguistics and corpus linguistics, including the creation of major resources for the study of the Polish language, including the creation of general reference corpora, the Polish large language model, dictionaries, and for example, we are currently preparing a frequency dictionary of Polish. So for those of you who study Polish or would like to study Polish, or those of you who have some Polish heritage, you might be interested in this work, which is going to be out next year, probably. Sorry, this is not. Sorry. Yeah. No.
No, if you click on like with the mouse.
Yeah, I am trying to do this. It doesn't.
Maybe right arrow.
Yeah. Yeah, I've tried this too. Yeah. Oh, no. Okay. Yeah. Also before I begin, I would like to, a trigger warning is in order. This talk is about violence and gendered violence in particular. So I will not discuss any specific violence situations in explicit detail, but if any of you feel that it might upset or distress you in any way, please feel free to leave now. More specifically, the talk explores the intersection between crisis migration, gender, and violence in European press reporting on the movement of refugees from Asia and Africa during the so-called European refugee crisis, that is between 2015 and 2018, and Ukrainian refugees following the full-scale Russian invasion in 2022. This discussion derives from a couple of different projects. I have been studying migration discourses for close to 10 years now, and I'm mainly going to present some of the results of the investigation, which has been discussed in this book, which is about to come out. This is also not the official cover yet, in case it doesn't show, but this is definitely the title. And the book discusses how British, Polish, and Spanish newspapers covered the European refugee crisis. And the examination of the portrayal of Ukrainian refugees has mainly been discussed in this paper, although not from the specific perspective I am taking today. I have to mention that this study only covers the very beginning of the war, and I am now working on an analysis of an expanded corpus which spans until the summer of 2025. Okay, so let's get to it. So when we talk about violence, or any other topic for that matter, we first need to make a distinction between the actual real life acts of violence with which we hopefully have less experience, and the way that violence is represented in discourse. And the latter, namely discursive representations of violence, is something that we come across much more frequently by reading the news, reading books, listening to podcasts, watching the TV, etc., etc. And as we come in contact with these different violence discourses, we should ask ourselves whether there is a relation of equivalence between the two, namely the act of violence and the way it is represented in discourse. Does this discursive representation do justice to the events as they occurred or as they tend to occur, or maybe does it distort them in some way for a specific purpose? Now, with respect to gendered violence, we again can see this as having two dimensions. The real life side, this is obviously an oversimplification, but for the sake of the discussion, the real life side and the discourse side. And on the real life side, we have crime statistics. And when we consider crime statistics in terms of gender differences in crime are consistently clear. Men commit much more violent crime than women, and the disproportion is especially large for sex offenses. This is obviously just a meme, so don't take these numbers at face value, but they are more or less accurate, or the tendency is, this is more or less the tendency. But at the same time, men are also substantially more likely to become victims of violence. And this is with the exceptions of rape and intimate partner violence. And this correlation between violence and gender tends to be reflected in discourse, with men being more frequently portrayed both as perpetrators and as victims of violent crime. However, more nuance is provided by studies taking an intersectional approach, which show that the tendency to portray men as violent can be even more pronounced for Black and Asian men, whereas women are consistently positioned discursively as recipients of violent actions, often sexual aggression, regardless of race. And similar trends have been observed for discourses of migration. Specifically, researchers have noted that the media often portray African and Asian male refugees or immigrants as threatening and prone to violence, especially sexual and terrorist violence. When, on the other hand, when displaced people are presented as victims, this is often limited to women and children. Studies of social media discourses also reveal a strong trend of invoking gender-based arguments against accepting refugees, linking men with violence and women with vulnerability and subjugation. And similarly, in institutional discourses, also men tend to be mentioned as an afterthought to the principal female victims of violence, if they are mentioned at all. And this is also true of many scholarly publications. However, studies indicate that men may actually be more vulnerable to some types of violence, such as forced recruitment into armed forces, and they can obviously also become victims of other types of violence, including sexual violence, which is typically associated with women and girls. And finally, both men and women, when they are positioned as illegal immigrants or asylum seekers, tend to become victims of structural violence, which is inflicted by transit and destination countries. And it is sometimes actually argued that men suffer from this type of discrimination to a more significant degree. So as I've mentioned, this study focuses on the media representations of the European refugee crisis between 2015 and 2018, when there was an increase in the number of people from Africa and Asia trying to reach Europe in search for safety. However, it is important to mention that the vast majority of the displaced people remained in neighboring low and middle income countries facing economic development challenges such as Turkey, Pakistan, Uganda, while only a small proportion of the displaced people disposed of the resources that are necessary to undertake a journey further north. The second corpus consists of news reports on the movement of Ukrainians who were forced to flee their country as a result of the full-scale Russian invasion, which began in late February 2022, and which led to the displacement of more than 8 million of people. This number has since gone down, since some Ukrainians have since returned home. The vast majority of Ukrainian refugees went to Poland, where they were welcomed enthusiastically, initially at least. And also, it is important to mention that the European Union also removed administrative obstacles refugees from other parts of the world usually face. And as a result, Ukrainians arriving in an EU state are automatically granted refugee status, which provides them with a work permit and gives them immediate access to essential services. In the context of gender, it is also important to note that the overwhelming majority of Ukrainian refugees are women and children, since men have been banned from leaving the country. Whereas Africans and Asians during the European refugee crisis were mostly boys and men, as this group was at a greater risk of being forced to join combat groups or being persecuted for refusing to do so. And moreover, families in conflict-affected areas often have resources to pay for only one person's journey out of the country, who is then expected to find paid employment and support the family financially, or to make their journeys easier and safer. And the role of breadwinners is usually reserved for young males. The study focuses on violence because when I examined the European refugee crisis data, I noticed that one of the most important themes in the corpus is concerned with safety and security, and this is the distribution of topic indicators in the three language subcorpora that I examined, which included Polish, Spanish, and British daily newspapers. And as you can see here, references to safety and security account for almost half of all topic indicators in the UK subcorpus, and they also prevail in the Polish and Spanish subcorpora. So I wanted to take a closer look at the words indexing this theme in order to establish what types of threats tend to be discussed in the reporting on the European refugee crisis, and which actors are positioned as perpetrators versus victims. And then I also wanted to contrast this with the reporting on Ukrainian refugees. However, the Ukrainian refugee study was conducted only on Polish data. So in order to be able to make a comparison, for the purpose of this talk, I am focusing on the Polish press, but I might occasionally also refer to the other two countries. Maybe I can, okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this is the distribution of the main themes in the Polish European refugee crisis corpus, and to the left and to the right, the Ukrainian refugee crisis. And what we can see here is that, with one exception, the majority of the themes overlap, but their distribution varies. As I've mentioned, the main topic in the European refugee crisis corpus was safety and security, followed by discussions of political and administrative issues. and the movement of the displaced people and humanitarian concerns were mentioned much less frequently. Whereas in the Ukrainian refugee crisis corpus, discussions of humanitarian aid and movement prevailed, whereas reporting on issues of safety and security and politics and administration was less pronounced. So what this shows is that Polish newspapers were much less concerned with the potential threat to safety and security where Ukrainians were concerned. And that also there was apparently less need to control them through policy compared to the movement of people from Asia and Africa. However, these results do not point precisely to the types of threat discussed, and to this end, the words in the category of safety and security were further subdivided into smaller, more specific groups. And as we can see here, there are as many as 12 different themes relating to safety and security in the European refugee crisis corpus, and only 8 in the set of texts on the movement of Ukrainians, and their distribution also differs significantly. So above all, in the European refugee crisis corpus, general references to threat prevail, followed by references to physical violence and damage to property, which account for a fifth of all topic indicators in this subcategory. And the overwhelming majority of the latter refer to violent crime, including sexual violence. For example, the word gwałt, meaning rape, as a noun, is the 4th most frequent word in this subcategory, and an analysis of a random sample of 100 concordances shows us that the vast majority of them construe refugees or migrants as the perpetrators or potential perpetrators. There are also other subcategories which contribute to the representation of the displaced people as threatening, such as extreme views and terrorism, references to actions intended to minimize or eliminate perceived threat, references to punishment, to legal status of the displaced people, and to protests. There are also some references to outcomes on a person's physical and psychological well-being, but they also tend to construe non-refugee actors as victims. For example, the frequent references to fear are used predominantly to describe attitudes of Europeans towards refugees, as in this example. And only a couple of categories point to the plight of refugees, positioning them as victims rather than perpetrators, and these include references to military conflicts and to discriminatory attitudes and behaviors. And I wanted to mention quickly that I have observed similar results for the Spanish and British subcorpora, albeit there are some small differences. For example, the UK press focused on discussions of the legality of the displaced people to a more significant extent, but as you can see, the three, in general, all three subcorpora follow very similar tendencies. On the other hand, in the text covering the Ukrainian refugee crisis, safety and security of the displaced people seems to be the central concern, and this is attested by the predominance of items referring to war. And similarly, health-related words are used mainly to discuss medical measures necessary to protect the well-being of the displaced people. There is some discussion of the ways to minimize or eliminate perceived threat and to physical violence and damage to property, but there is no indication that Ukrainians are deemed to be perpetrators of violence or potential perpetrators. Okay, so this part of the investigation has been more concerned with the types of threat, with the types of threatening and violent behavior discussed in European press reporting on crisis migration. And while it has provided some indication as to the groups of actors who tend to be construed as victims versus perpetrators, the second part of the talk addresses this issue more systematically. And to this end, I would like to present the results of a collocation analysis of the term uchodźca, meaning refugee. And because I wanted to focus on gendered actors, and the word for female refugee had only a handful of occurrences. The female, well, there is a word meaning female refugee in Polish. It is just not used very frequently. Usually the male term is used generically. So because of that, I decided to also include the dilemmas kobieta, meaning woman, and mężczyzna, meaning man. And this part of the analysis has shown that among the verbs collocating saliently with refugee, the most populous group indexes the topic of threat. Refugee is usually positioned as the subject of these verbs, including kill and attack, thus construing the displaced people as perpetrators of violent acts. The verbs which take uchodźca, refugee, as an object also contribute to this trend by representing refugees as being detained and eliciting fear. However, there are important caveats to this finding, as the analysis of the words woman and men reveal. So above all, it has shown that the threatening behavior is only attributed to men, whereas women are invariably construed as victims of violence. And it can also be observed that when discussions of threats to women are concerned, sexual violence seems to attract particular attention of the media. And then a concordance analysis provides even more nuance to these findings by taking intersectionality into account. So above all, it demonstrates that the perpetrators of the acts of violence are not men in general, but rather almost invariably male refugees, whereas male citizens of the host countries are only rarely construed as violent, and the only acts of violence, the only type of violence that European men resort to, according to these news reports, are racist attacks against refugees, which, considering the overall negative tone of the reporting, might suggest that they were justified in defending themselves, their homeland, their women against the threatening refugees. The victims of violence, on the other hand, tend to be European women, followed by European men, and only a handful of concordances refer to the traumatic experiences of refugees, both refugee men and refugee women. And we have an interesting situation in the Ukrainian refugee crisis corpus, where refugee collocates with only one word referring to violence, the word attack. And unlike in the coverage of the European refugee crisis, it was mostly employed in the context of military action, therefore presenting Ukrainians as victims of the Russian invasion. However, this collocation, refugee and attack, was also used unexpectedly with respect to Asian and African refugees. So the question is, why were Africans and Asians mentioned in the in the reporting on Ukrainian refugees. So it turns out that there was fake news was being circulated on the internet saying that some people crossing the Polish-Ukrainian border had dark skin. So maybe they were not fleeing the war, the Russian invasion, but maybe they were using the movement of Ukrainians to sneak into Poland, and that this fake news caused some violent reactions of Polish nationalists living in one of the border towns, and this was what was covered by the press. So the word attack was used to describe the racist attacks against people who did not fit neatly the profile of a white Ukrainian refugee. So the second part of the investigation has shown that there is a strong link between violence and Asian and African refugees, but only refugee men are positioned as the perpetrators, with no indication that they might also suffer as a consequence of violence. Female refugees, in turn, are conspicuously absent when discussions of threat and violence are concerned. Instead, Europeans, above all European women, tend to be represented as the principal victims of acts of violence committed by the displaced people. Somehow unexpectedly, refugees from Asia and Africa also feature prominently in the reports on Ukrainian refugees or Ukrainian refugee crisis. And while this time they tend to be positioned as victims, a more detailed analysis shows that the violence that they are reported to experience is the result of their perception as threatening. Ukrainian refugees, in turn, are construed uniquely as victims. Yes, so to sum up. The analysis has shown that the European mainstream press was preoccupied to a significant extent by the threat of violence, especially sexual and terrorist violence, during the European refugee crisis. Violence appears to be most newsworthy when it is committed by male refugees against European women. Some attention is also devoted to European men when they become victims of violence, but there is very little reporting on violence against both female and male refugees, except when it is in the context of the circumstances of their migrations, which are, however, discussed rarely in the news reports analyzed. So there is a contradiction in these types of media discourses, because on the one hand, refugees are expected to perform their refugee-ness. They are expected to be seen as vulnerable and victimized in order to be seen as deserving of humanitarian aid. But on the other hand, there are expectations resulting from the norms of masculinity. Men are supposed to be strong and fearless, to always be able to provide for their families, to protect them. So once they stop complying to these norms, they are portrayed as morally deficient, as cowards who flee to safety, leaving their families behind, as in this quote from a Polish politician. But on the other hand, if they fail to perform their refugee-ness, for example, by being young, male, able-bodied, part of a larger group, their status also switches from victim to threat. So regardless of which set of expectations male migrants disappoint, the outcome is always a discursive delegitimization of the right to seek refuge in a Western country. And when it comes to female refugees, because their suffering is always backgrounded deterrence measures and legal violence can ultimately be applied to all refugees, regardless of gender. And also when it comes to gendered violence, because these discourses present such a simplified, oversimplified, unidimensional picture of gendered violence, they also do not allow for a critical engagement with violence and masculinity, or we might even argue that they uphold and reinforce the hegemonic masculinist gender ideologies, for example, by strengthening protective paternalism, which is the belief that men are responsible for protecting their women, which is a component of benevolent sexism, which in turn has a long-standing connection with to racism and anti-immigrant attitudes. For example, there are psychological studies showing that reading about increases in violent crime makes white men feel more protective of white women. This does not, like for men, non-white men, this does not work this way. It's only, this effect has only been observed for white men. And this in turn is associated with a more negative view of immigration. So there is a correlation between feeling protective of white women and being more anti-immigration. And these findings can be seen in light of the analysis of the corpus of news reports covering the movement of Ukrainian refugees, which has shown that in discourses surrounding Ukrainian refugees, violence was almost a non-issue except for discussions of war, which contextualized their plight. Another violence-related topic were the isolated violent reactions towards non-Ukrainian and non-white refugees in response to fake news which portrayed them as a threat. And this actually provides further evidence of how deeply entrenched these racist narratives are in European public discourses, and how they can be manipulated and used by actors who may be hostile towards Europe, who want to achieve some ideological goals. It is also interesting to notice the awareness of fake news displayed by the newspapers when it comes to Ukrainian refugees, especially in light of the fact that European media often publish fake or unverified news regarding Asian and African refugees. And this is often in relation to sexual and terrorist violence. So to sum up what we've seen here today, the results of the study highlight the gendered and sexualized nature of racism underlying European responses towards African and Asian refugees who are construed as threatening and prone to violence, whereas ethnically similar Ukrainians are above all victimized. And this helps to discursively deprive the former of the right to seek refuge in Europe, thus contributing to the preservation of the volatile status quo for one of the most vulnerable populations in the world, while at the same time doing little or nothing to combat gender-based violence. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course.
Do you have questions? Yeah.
Thank you. It's really interesting. I think I missed something because you showed many pie charts that are then showing the proportions. Did you analyze the amount of reporting that, like, do they report to the same extent on each group? or is there a difference in the amount of reports?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, the corpora only focus on. So I did not have a big corpus of reporting on immigration in general, and then I would be able to see if there was more reporting on this group versus a different group. So they were two separate corpora compiled following the same principles. But yeah, they only focused. So no, it's and also this is 4 years of reporting, and this is only the very beginning of the war. So I do have data for yeah, like I said, for the later years until the summer 2025, but I haven't had time to analyze it all yet. So yeah. Sorry, I cannot answer it.
No, it's okay. Maybe one more. I was also wondering if you were able, I understand it's not a big corpora, but to what extent does it contain also reports about what's going on in the war zones? So both refugees, well, at least to an extent, come from war zones. Does the media report only domestic interaction with refugees or also?
Yeah, this is what this shows basically. So when it comes to Ukrainian refugees, you see a lot of reporting on war. So this basically reports there's lots of reporting on what is happening in Ukraine. Whereas here you have there was also you can compare it. So this is only 7% of words referring to war, to military conflicts. So in general, there's much less reporting on the context, on what caused the migration here compared to Ukraine. So basically with Ukraine, what you have is, there's also geographical closeness is a factor. Obviously, Poles will want to know what is happening in Ukraine, close to home, exactly. But it makes it more difficult to empathize with, feel empathy. Yeah, sorry. With people when you cannot imagine what their circumstances are, what led them to migrate, etc. I hope at least this question, I was able to.
I just may follow up on your question. So you're saying that this is for 4 years, and that's not sure. Did you do also like how this evolves over time? So
No.
they report in the beginning.
No, I haven't done that. Although there is research showing that there are different phases. This is also a very good question, because this might also, the fact that this reporting on Ukrainian refugees is more sympathetic, the fact that this is only the beginning might also account for the more sympathetic coverage, because there is research showing that for the European refugee crisis, not for Polish data, but for data for other countries, I don't remember, I think the UK, there is data showing that at the beginning the reporting was much more sympathetic. They call it ecstatic humanitarianism, I think. And then it was slowly, and I think we would see something like this if I get a chance to analyze the later reporting. I think we would see something like this for the Ukrainian situation as well, although probably not to the same extent as here. I wouldn't expect this to get as negative as this, but I might be wrong. Yes, sorry.
I want to ask with the methodological question. How did you classify certain like, how did you get these numbers? So, like, did you go by concordances? Did you look at an article, classify it as like the topic?
I did it all manually. And yeah, I did look at the concordances when there was some doubt regarding the use of a specific word. But yes, it is.
Oh,
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not really possible to get a very clear cut distinctions between these different groups, because obviously, for example, I have a very general category, but these words might also have been used in the reporting of the war. So, but this is
There
is
is some margin for error, but it is mostly like these numbers are generally representative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, do you plan to or know of other researchers who are looking into other forms of news media? Since a lot of I know that a lot of discourse surrounding the refugee crisis is on social media platforms, especially Twitter.
Yeah, there is research on social media discourse as well. If you email me, I can send you the literature. But yes, there is lots of research on social media discourses. The TV also, but less obviously, because it's more difficult to collect data, audiovisual data. Yeah, mainly the press and social media. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Questions maybe not fully on topic, but I'm thinking about that you were invited here to work on the NLP project on euphemisms.
Yeah.
Have you noticed any euphemisms being used in the pieces on refugee in the media? Are you seeing like a connection between those two projects?
We actually used the European refugee crisis corpus also for the euphemism project. We did extract some euphemisms on concerning refugees from this corpus. I think it was only like 100 euphemisms. But yeah, definitely there is definitely an overlap. We've decided not to expand that category because it's more, we've decided that it will be more difficult for the annotators to you have to be familiar with the topic to see that this is a euphemism. For example, what comes to mind now are the words like import and export, like import of people, export of people. This is euphemistic, and but you would need to, like I say, you would need to be familiar with the topic. You would need to have this sensibility to the topic to be able to recognize some of these words, some of these terms as euphemistic, because it also with this reporting on immigration uses lots of institutional language, and institutional terms are not always very transparent to people when it comes to euphemistic meanings. Like people feel that this is a normal, let's say, like a normal term that is in use. This is what this is called, but what they don't see is that it is actually a euphemism. For example, war euphemisms also use this tendency of the people to not see this as euphemistic. Yeah, I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but yes, definitely this was also a source of euphemisms, and it was a nice overlap between the two projects.
Thank you. Another question? I probably don't remember if you said that, but could you please remind us what kind of media, what kind of sources were included in your corpus?
You don't remember because I didn't say. Yeah, I didn't want to bore you with the details, but it's newspapers for these yeah, like I had two for the Polish subcorpus. I had two broadsheet newspapers, two main broadsheet newspapers, and two tabloids for the UK for the Spanish subcorpus. Spain doesn't publish tabloids, so it was basically for broadsheet newspapers. The main criterion was the readership. I only selected newspapers with the highest readership in each country. And then for the UK subcorpus, tabloids prevail, but this is the UK market is, in general, it is dominated by tabloid press. So, but it is more or less balanced with respect to the right wing, left wing.
I was asking because it's really,
it just so happens that it wasn't the criterion, but yes, it is more or less balanced in this respect. Yeah.
Yeah, I asked it exactly for this reason, because if you collect data, let's say in the US, and you collect only New York Times, so or New York Post, so it will be very different.
Yeah.
But whatever, almost every topic.
Yeah, exactly.
Every sensitive.
Yeah.
I want to follow, sort of. Because if I look at, there are way more opinion pieces in newspapers these days and more diversity in terms of authorship. Do you think it would be possible to get any information about the authors or the texts to see how it correlates with the terminology and topics? So not authorship identity, but more profile, refugee status, things like that. I don't know if the refugees themselves are already part of the media. It's a bit of a stretch, but.
This is difficult. In Polish newspapers, sometimes the short texts are not signed with an author's name and surname, just, for example, initials. So yeah, it would require an investigation into who is who.
It can be a computational project.
Yes.
Authorship, authorship groups.
Yeah.
Or potentially, there could be a profile of the newspapers as a whole.
Yeah, definitely. This corpus does not include opinion pieces, so it's only news. It doesn't include letters. So this is, I think, it's less dependent on a specific author. More, I would say that it's more. It has to be in line with the editorial line rather than with a specific author's ideas or opinions. But I don't know. It would be, this is, it would be.
Thinking so you said it for the Ukrainian crisis.
Yeah.
It's close to home, but it's close to home in many senses. It's geographically close, it's culturally close, there's so many.
Yeah.
But in terms of authorship, it can also be close to home, depending on authorship.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. The geographical, even the where you are from exactly. with respect to Ukraine? Like, do you live closer to the border? Do you live in Warsaw? Where there's lots of refugees, live. This definitely impacts on how you see this. Yeah.
More questions? We don't have questions in the chat. Questions in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.